if Ukraine is invaded, the shock will echo around the world. And those echoes will be heard in East Asia, they will be heard in Taiwan. When I spoke to the Prime Ministers of Japan and Australia this week, they left me in no doubt that the economic and political shocks will be felt on the far side of the world. So let me be clear about the risk. The risk now is that people would draw the conclusion that aggression pays and that might is right. So we should not underestimate the gravity of this moment and what is at stake. As I speak to you today, we do not fully know what President Putin intends, but the omens are grim, and that is why we must stand strong together. The UK has worked with the European Union and the United States to put together the toughest and strongest package of sanctions, and I spoke recently to President Ursula von der Leyen to discuss the measures prepared by the EU in closest coordination with our own. And if Russia invades its neighbor, we will sanction Russian individuals and companies of strategic importance to the Russian state. And we will make it impossible for them to raise finance on the London capital markets. And we will open up the matryoshka dolls of Russian-owned companies and Russian-owned entities to find the ultimate beneficiaries within. And if President Putin believes that by these actions he can drive NATO back or intimidate NATO, he will find that the opposite is the case. Already the UK and our allies are strengthening the defences of the eastern flank of NATO. We're increasing the British contribution to exercise cold response by sending our newest aircraft carrier, HMS Prince of Wales, and 3 Commando Brigade. We're doubling our presence in Estonia to nearly 2,000 troops. We've increased our presence in Poland to 600 troops by sending 350 Marines from 4-5 Commando. We've increased our presence in the skies over southeastern Europe with another 6 Typhoons based in Cyprus. We're sending warships to the eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea. And I've placed another 1,000 troops on standby to respond to any humanitarian emergency, which we all fear is increasingly likely. And while the most alarming and the most visible threat is the massing of Russian land forces on Ukraine's borders, look at the naval buildup in the Black Sea, which threatens to blockade Ukraine. Look at the massive cyber attacks and the incoming tide of disinformation. This crisis extends into every domain, which is why the UK is providing NATO with more land, sea, and air forces. And it is because we feared a crisis like this that we were already engaged in the biggest increase in defence investment for a generation, spread across conventional capabilities and the new technologies that are ever more important to our collective defence. And I'm proud to say that since Russia invaded Ukraine for the first time and annexed Crimea in 2014, we have been helping Ukraine, training 22,000 troops, and in recent months, in response to the threat, we have been among the nations to send defensive weaponry in the form of 2,000 anti-tank missiles. And I'm glad that we've been joined in this by the United States, by Poland, and by our Baltic allies, and that many other nations and the EU have, like the UK, helped to strengthen Ukraine's economy. Britain will always stand up for freedom and democracy around the world. And when I say that our commitment to European security is immovable and unconditional, our deeds show that we mean our words. We are making the biggest contribution of NATO to NATO of any European ally because we understand the importance of collective security. And just as our European friends stood by us after the Russian state used chemical weapons in Salisbury, used a chemical weapon in Salisbury, so Britain will stand by you. But we must accept that these measures by the UK and our allies, draconian sanctions, rinsing out dirty money, the intensification of NATO's defences, fortifying our Ukrainian friends, they may not be enough to deter Russian aggression. And it is therefore vital that we learn the lessons of 2014. Whatever happens in the next few days and weeks, we cannot allow European countries to be blackmailed by Russia. We cannot allow the threat of Russian aggression to change the security architecture of Europe. We cannot permit a new Yalta, a new division of our continent into spheres of influence. And we must now wean ourselves off dependence on Putin's oil and gas. And I understand the costs and the complexities of this effort and the fact that it is easier said than done. So I'm grateful to Chancellor Scholz's assurances about Nord Stream 2. But the lessons of the last few years and of Gazprom's obvious manipulation of European gas supply cannot be ignored. We must ensure that by making full use of alternative supplies and technology, we make Russia's threats redundant. And that will be the work of the months and years to come, as well as the necessary and overdue steps that we in the UK must take to protect our own financial system. And we now need to prepare ourselves for the Russian playbook of deception that governs every operation of this kind. There will be a cascade of false claims about Ukraine intended to spread confusion almost for its own sake. And even now there are plans being laid for staged events, spinning a web of falsehoods designed to present any Russian attack as a response to provocation. We've already witnessed a fake military withdrawal combined with staged incidents that could provide a pretext for military action. We knew this was coming. We've seen it before, and no one should be fooled. And we have to steel ourselves for the possibility of a protracted crisis, with Russia maintaining the pressure and searching for weaknesses over an extended period. And we must, together, refuse to be worn down. What Europe needs is strategic endurance, and we should focus our energies on preserving our unity and on deepening transatlantic cooperation. But for that to work, we must also be prepared to devote the necessary resources to carry a greater share of the burden of preserving our continent's security and to demonstrate that we are in it for the long haul. For now, we should continue to do everything we can to pursue the path of peace and dialogue. There is a way forward if President Putin is minded to take it. There is a discussion to be had about the threats that he claims to see, because in reality, as we all know, those threats are an illusion. They are the product of the Kremlin's chronic but misguided view of NATO as a supposedly encircling and intimidating alliance. That is not NATO's function. NATO is a peaceful and a defensive alliance. And we are willing to work with President Putin to demonstrate that point and to give him the assurances that he may need. We could point out that until he invaded Ukraine for the first time in 2014, NATO did not permanently station any troops anywhere east of Germany. And it was as recently as 2017 that the US, the UK, and other NATO allies established the enhanced forward presence to protect Poland and the Baltic states. And even then, the total deployment of fewer than 5,000 troops posed no conceivable threat to Russia. And it is only in the last few weeks, in response to the current crisis, that we have dispatched reinforcements, though still in numbers that constitute no possible threat. Until 2014, European allies were cutting their defense budgets and shrinking their armed forces, perhaps faster than was safe or wise. And to the extent that this has changed, it is because of the actions of President Putin and the tension that he has created. If NATO forces are now closer to Russia's border, it is in response to his decisions and the justified concerns they have provoked among our allies. And there are many things said about what may or may not have been said in the closed-door meetings of 3 decades ago as the Berlin Wall fell and Germany was reunited. But there is no doubt that we all agreed legal obligations to protect the security of every country in Europe. And what happened in those amazing years was the dissolution of the Iron Curtain and the fulfillment of the vision of a Europe whole and free. It was one of the most incredible moments of my lifetime, as nations at the heart of our continent regained their liberty and their sovereign right to control their own destiny and seek their own alliances. We will not abandon the hope and impulse of that era, made possible by the courage of millions of ordinary Europeans. And that's why NATO opened its doors to 14 states after 1999, and we cannot allow our open door to be slammed shut. But if dialogue fails, and if Russia chooses to use violence against an innocent and peaceful population in Ukraine, and to disregard the norms of civilized behavior between states, and to disregard the Charter of the United Nations, then we at this conference should be in no doubt that it is in our collective interest that Russia should ultimately fail and be seen to fail. I believe that in preparing to invade Ukraine, a proud country whose armed forces now exceed 200,000 personnel, considerably more expert in combat today than in 2014, President Putin and his circle are gravely miscalculating. I fear that a lightning war would be followed by a long and hideous period of reprisals and revenge and insurgency. And Russian parents would mourn the loss of young Russian soldiers who, in their way, are every bit as innocent as the Ukrainians now bracing themselves for attack. And if Ukraine is overrun by brute force, I fail to see how a country encompassing nearly 250,000 square miles, the biggest nation in Europe apart from Russia itself, could then be held down and subjugated forever. After a generation of freedom, we're now staring at a generation of bloodshed and misery. I believe that Russia would have absolutely nothing to gain from this catastrophic venture and everything to lose. And while there is still time, I urge the Kremlin to de-escalate, to disengage its forces from the frontier and to renew our dialogue. Every nation at this conference shares a vision of a secure and prosperous Europe of sovereign states, deciding their own destiny and living without fear or threat. And that vision, of course, extends to Russia, a nation whose cultural patrimony we revere and whose sacrifice in the struggle against fascism was immeasurable. Russia has as much right as any other country to live in peace and security. And we should never cease to emphasize that Russia has nothing to fear from our vision, which threatens and marginalizes no one. And as we come together in unity and resolve, we must also show wisdom and moderation, because it's precisely by that unity that we show today that we have the best chance, even now, at this 11th hour, of averting disaster and ensuring that good sense can still prevail. And it is that message of unity that we must send from this conference today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. What a powerful statement at the end of this morning session here today. Thank you very much. We have only a couple of minutes left, but I'm actually grateful to you, speaking personally, for reminding us that this continent, which many of us have been dreaming of as a continent of peace, of eternal peace, has actually not been a continent of fully established peace, and and whatever peace we've had is now under immediate and terrible threat. I think of the Balkans in the 1990s. I think of Georgia in the 2000s. I think of the war that's been going on now since 2014, the conflict in and around Ukraine. Now, here's my question. Given these challenges, of course, we work on the military aspects of deterrence, etc., very well in NATO. But should we not also strive to establish, or maybe I should say re-establish, a more efficient method regarding the closest possible cooperation between your government and the EU on, let's say, especially, of course, on the non-military aspects? There is such a need, as I think, of coordination, cooperation on all sorts of foreign policy aspects. What is your vision regarding the EU-UK relationship in the area of foreign policy?
Well, thanks very much, Wolfgang, and Ambassador Ischinger, I should say. But I want the closest possible cooperation across all aspects of policy, economic, political, diplomatic, military. And if you look at what we're doing in foreign policy coordination, I think it's fair to say that sometimes the UK has been out in front. I think, maybe with sanctions on Belarus, we were a little bit ahead of our EU friends. But everything we do is always coordinated with Brussels. And when it comes to preparing the sanctions package against Russia, which has to be as tough as possible if it's going to make any difference to the calculations of Vladimir Putin, we've been working very closely with Ursula von der Leyen. I'll give you a couple more examples on Lithuania and the issue that they have currently with China. There, the UK stands four square with Lithuania and working with our EU friends. I'll just give you, another example of the way in which we continue to work very intensively together. A bit of tiny sort of shard of a fragment of good news is that it may be that the JCPOA has more life in it than we thought. Perhaps a few months ago. That's encouraging. This is an example of where the UK and the EU share completely the same objectives, work together hand in glove. So I think that there's ample continuity in our foreign policy coordination, basically because our values are the same. Our values and our objectives are the same. And it's about freedom, it's about democracy, it's about human rights, it's about liberty. And that's what's at stake today in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Final question. An hour ago or so, we had Vice President Harris speaking here. And I raised with her the concern, which I know exists in the minds of many here on the European side, that when Joe Biden says, America is back, the question is this for good? In other words, my question to you is, as British Prime Minister, what, if anything, can we do as Europeans, and you are, of course, also a European, to make this...
My ancestors come from Munich.
To make this transatlantic relationship sustainably close, to keep the United States engaged well beyond the current administration, where we have no doubt about their commitment, but how do we make it, crystal clear and more permanent again after the experience of the Trump administration?
Well, thank you, Wolfgang. Look, I think actually this experience, terrible though it is, may serve to do even more to unify the transatlantic alliance. And when you think about what Putin wants, in this whole diplomatic merry-go-round that we've been seeing, he wants engagement with the United States of America. And what the crisis in Ukraine has done is escalate and demonstrate the fundamental importance of that United States security guarantee to NATO and the crucial role of the United States in guaranteeing peace in Europe. So paradoxically, I think it's helped to bring the US center stage. I think it's also helped to bring NATO center stage, in the sense that we're all now working together to fortify the eastern frontiers of NATO in the way that I described earlier on. And France is helping in Romania. Other countries are supporting NATO engagement across the whole of the eastern perimeter of NATO. And you're seeing an intensification of NATO activity and greater emphasis placed on the importance of NATO in the whole conversation. And that is good, in my view, for transatlantic security. And for me, that underlines the crucial role that NATO plays, the fundamental guarantor of Europe's security, irrespective of all other conversations about European security architecture, to which I, of course, defer and which we can have. But NATO is fundamental and at the core. The final point I would make is that I think that the crisis is bringing us together as we consider what's happening around the world. And so when we think about what's happening in the Indo-Pacific region and the threats to stability, to our values in that region, I think that what's happening in Ukraine now and the collective response that we're seeing to what's happening in Ukraine should now be developed. And we should think of ways in which we can participate together to promote those things we believe in, not just in the European theatre, but around the world. And I hope very much that, and you can see American engagement and American involvement in those questions, and it's absolutely vital that we continue to see it. So we can't say what's going to happen in the course of the next few days. We can't be certain, but I just want to repeat one thing. I believe it absolutely vital for our collective security that the venture, if there is a violent act of aggression by President Putin, that it should not be a success, that it should fail, and that I believe with enough collective resolve we can ensure that it does fail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Let me remind you that after lunch we will have the opportunity to listen to what President Zelensky has to say about the current threatening situation. Prime Minister, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's give a hand to the Prime Minister.